Black Audit Project is an initiative that seeks to assess the human rights conditions of the Black community. And we contextualize those human rights conditions that we find and with the history by also researching the history of that community, figuring out, how the community started, how people of African descent have migrated through the community, what different events or United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we use that because it is, first of all, a neutral and internationally used metric that is very well documented and laid out so that the communities we go to, they understand what it is that we're looking at. And it's very also comprehensive. We're looking at everything from housing to food insecurity, to clean water, to education, a lot of different issues that impact the community in a number of ways. And that broad net that we get to cast allow us to see what I feel is, now you guys can hear me. Oh, great. What is a very wide net to start to understand some of the racialized harms and impacts of the Black community. And really the goal was to get that disaggregated data and to report it out to the community and to the world. And what we're finding with this is that a lot of the past harms are from the community, Black community's history. It's directly connected to the current conditions. For example, the systematic dismantling of the system of Black midwives that existed decades ago, and once policies existed to discourage Black midwives and doulas, we started to see the current conditions of very high infant and maternal mortality rates in the Black community. We've also seen, for example, in Wilmington, Delaware, where we were this spring, patterns of reported wage discrimination in the past connecting to current levels of low household income. This project has always been one part research and one part community power building, connecting impacted people of African descent and the activists in their community to civil society, advocating for the very same things that are impacting them, and connecting them to international mechanisms such as the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. Some of our partners we've had this project going for 3 years now. This past year, specifically, we have worked also with the African American Redress Network, pulling from students from several universities to help support this research and this community work. We have worked with the Center for Global Africa. We have also partnered with the University of Miami Human Rights and Environmental Rights Clinic. And recently, we also started partnering with several reparations commissions. And our platform of being able to connect to the past harms and research the past harms, specifically with being able to tease out in the community the current data, and not just statistical data. I want to make sure that's clear of what's going on in the community, but also connecting with the impacted people and making sure that we're capturing the narrative data, their lived experiences being just as valid as any type of statistical data that we could pull to describe what's going on in the Black community. This is the important infrastructure that we are trying to make sure that we are sharing in every community that we can. So to describe a little bit more of some of the work that we've done, I am going to ask Gabby from the University of Miami.
Hello, as she said, my name is Gabby Thomas, fellow for the Human Rights Clinic at the University of Miami School of Law and a third-year law student. The Human Rights Clinic has compiled a report to assess the progress of Sustainable Development Goals in Black communities in Miami, with a focus on the right to housing, the right to food, maternal health, and the right to education. Our research was based on one-to-one interviews, community dialogue through series of town halls, live polling, and collaboration with multiple educational training clinics centered around human rights and environmental injustice. The report benefits from the community input and reviews of community leaders and experts, and a town hall with critical partners that are listed on the next slide. The report was drafted by the following students and fellow interns with the Human Rights Clinic: Gabriel Thomas, myself, Lily Artsosdon, Christina Bergman, Jordan Brooks, Juliana Green, Castro Greiner, Cassandra Hacker, Zoe Henderson, Fotini Suarez, Brianna Sanchez, Lakshmi, Nick Seltzer, and Abigail Wittstein, under the supervision of the clinic directors Denise Cordova Montez and Tamar Ezer. There are many shades of Black in Miami: ethnic shades, economic shades, religious shades, and political shades. Within the historical section of our report, we highlight that despite the various economic, ethnic, religious, or political backgrounds, Black persons in Miami have continuously experienced racially motivated economic violence, racially motivated displacement, racially motivated environmental injustice, and racially motivated violence, police brutality, and intimidation. Economic equality is faced by all Black ethnic groups in Miami-Dade County, but especially Haitians and African Americans. Today, Haitians continue to face triple discrimination by being Black, migrants, and linguistically isolated. In the city of Miami, Haitians and African Americans are more likely than any other ethnic group to live in poverty, with poverty rates of 45% and 44% respectively. Since the inception of the city of Miami, in the late 1800s, Black history in Miami has been colored with segregation, displacement, resegregation, and gentrification. From redlining to racist land use policies leading to the displacement of tens of thousands of Black Miami residents, Miami still today remains one of the most deeply segregated cities by race and ethnicity in the United States. Historically segregated areas are 2 times as likely to have poor health, and these Black persons are 2 times as likely to be evicted. Black communities in Miami-Dade County have continuously faced environmental injustices to systematic racism. The historical causes of environmental racism still persist, and the effects are ever present. Environmental racism in Miami has caused cancer, respiratory problems, endocrinological issues, skin conditions, higher kidney failure, and other conditions due to the exposure of ash from trash incinerators. For example, while only 21% of the Miami-Dade population is Black, over 53% of the reported cases of childhood lead poisoning from 1995 to 1998 were Black children. Since the inception of Miami, Black persons have faced violence at the hands of the civilian and state actors. Often thought of as a tourist and sunshine town, Miami was actually a sundown town. The history of Black Miami is full of racially motivated beatings, maimings, lynchings, bombings, and white supremacist parades. Racial tensions escalated into riots in the 1960s and 1980s, which are described as the darkest moments in Miami-Dade County history. In terms of state actors, since the inception of Miami-Dade County, Black residents have made up the majority of the jails and arrests. Today, racial and ethnic disparities occur at all points of the criminal justice system and across all neighborhoods in Miami-Dade County. To summarize all the findings that we've had, obviously, there are a lot of issues going on, as you can see. So I'm going to start with housing. With housing, more than 50% of people experiencing homelessness in Miami-Dade County are Black. Miami-Dade County suffers from multiple laws and policies that criminalize homelessness despite this fact. This creates a poverty to homeless to prison pipeline. Miami is the least affordable housing market overall due to economic inequality. This poses specific challenges for people of African descent. Miami is also drenched with food apartheid. Food apartheid is a system of racial segregation that divides those with access to abundance of nutritious food and those that are divides people with an abundance of nutritious food and those that are denied those nutritious foods. There are disparities that go beyond nutrition, which include access to water, access to sanitation. Black persons in Miami also face challenges due to climate change. Many Black residents experience regular flooding and climate gentrification. In terms of recommendations, we recommend Miami strengthen laws, funding, enforcement of the Fair Housing Act, implement stricter regulations on lending, and increase funding and support Black neighborhoods. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to food. Miami-Dade County has banned large public feedings despite its homelessness problem and made it unlawful to publicly feed large groups of people that are homeless. This creates a humanitarian hunger crisis with a high number of Black homeless persons in Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County also has a poor and costly public transportation system. This affects elderly Black persons especially, and Black persons in Miami living in poverty generally. Florida also, at large, prevents those with felony convictions from accessing SNAP benefits. This negatively impacts the Black community as they are over-policed, disproportionately arrested, and over-prosecuted. For example, Black men are 6 times as likely to be incarcerated than white and Latino men in Florida. We recommended that the state of Florida make food entitlement programs accessible to people with drug felony convictions, establish support systems to prevent pregnant and young children, to protect pregnant and young children and the elderly despite income level or criminal status, and remove all restrictions on public feeding to assist homeless people in getting their proper nutrition. Please see the last slide. We're going to have all the racial maps and data on the last slide as well. So let's move on to maternal health and gender-based violence. Miami-Dade County has more infant mortality compared to Florida at large, and Black mothers are significantly more likely to experience pregnancy-related complications and deaths than their white counterparts. The over-medicalization of the maternal health care system in Miami-Dade County leads to increased medical interventions that require further interventions, leading to an increased risk of complications and ultimately increased sickness and death for birthing persons and their children. The commercialization of the maternal health care has continued to lead to hospital closures in Miami-Dade County, creating maternal deserts, mostly between downtown Miami and Hollywood. Maternal mortality. In 2020, Black mothers in Miami-Dade County were more than 3 times likely to die within a year of childbirth compared to their white counterparts. In 2022, Black mothers were more than twice as likely to experience severe maternal mortality. In terms of the C-section rate, although the World Health Organization recommends keeping the C-section rate below 15%, over-medicalization has led to the astronomical C-section rate in Miami-Dade County of 445%. Many of which are unnecessary, ultimately leading to an increased maternal morbidity and mortality. The over-medicalization and commercialization of medical care also contributes to the epidemic of obstructed violence in Miami-Dade County. In Miami-Dade County, Black women frequently complain of abuse and trauma following giving birth in the hospital. Pregnancy complications also adversely affect infants, with maternal pregnancy complications being the 5th leading cause of infant mortality in the county. The most alarming aspect is over 80% of pregnancy-related deaths are preventable. Amongst all groups, mental health conditions were the leading cause of pregnancy-related deaths. Black women also face significant preventable barriers to breastfeeding initiation, namely inadequate support to hospital support. The crisis and its related barriers violate the fundamental human rights of health, life, physical integrity, equality, non-discrimination, and special protections for the mother and child. The reproductive health care crisis in Miami-Dade County is a result of current policies and practices in Florida and Miami-Dade County, including the lack of access to health care, poorly funded public programs, and the deficient education on pregnancy fueled this crisis. Recommendations to combat this issue include Medicaid expansion, expanding and diversifying the prenatal workforce, particularly midwives and doulas, live healthy legislation, building and empowering communities via multi-sectoral partnerships, and strengthening economic and social support for people during and after pregnancy. In terms of gender-based violence in Miami-Dade County against Black women, gender-based violence against Black women has always existed in the U.S. since the first Black enslaved women were forcibly taken from Africa. More than 2 in 5 women have been experienced rape, physical violence, and stalking. 1 in 5 Black women experience rape. While Black women are disproportionately affected by domestic violence related to felony assaults, the rape and sexual violence of Black women are rendered invisible by the Miami-Dade County reporting system. White women are dramatically overrepresented in fields of gender-based violence, creating a non-inclusive culture. There is little to no data available on sexual violence, domestic violence, sexual assault, or trafficking on Black women of African descent. There is also a lack of trust between police authorities, and white women occupying positions of power in gender-based violence. Recommendations include increasing Black persons in positions of authority surrounding gender-based violence and addressing the lack of data availability on this issue. We also did some research as well on censorship and education. Miami, due to being in Florida, has a serious issue of censorship of Black history due to the abolition of DEI, abolition of the discussions of institutional racism, the censorship of discussions around oppression and identity politics, all of which raise significant concerns to human rights. Recommendations include mobilizing civic society to attack these bans through advocacy, litigation, voting, and other tools of change. So in sum, the report includes all these statistics that I just had to breeze through in order to adequately address all the data that we have collected. As you can see here, this is the Human Rights Clinic Black Audit Report here, and then the Environmental Justice Clinic report here. The Human Rights Clinic report is a qualitative study. The Environmental Justice Clinic report produced very interesting racial mapping of Miami-Dade County and charts as well that are very useful for advocacy and easily shared. I also wanted to highlight the NOR project and the Black Freedom Lab in Miami, which, if you're interested in these issues, I say that you should follow them on Instagram, and also follow Valencia Gunder, which is one of the leading activists in Miami-Dade County that unfortunately could not be here today. On the left, that's Valencia, and on the right, that is some of the community members that she works with as well. You can also click the NOR project, which is a live polling study where Black people can, answer questions on issues facing the Black community in Miami-Dade County, and she is collecting data on that, and you can learn more about that using that link. So you can just take a picture there as well. Thank you for having me and listening, and I hope that despite how fast I had to talk, you caught some of the important issues going on there. Thank you.
Social Change Research Hub, led by our students, have been working to create a database that captures resources in our area, and so that we're in the best position to inform our community of how they can do the work of advancing racial equity. To really center this conversation, I think it's important that we have a clear understanding of what we're dealing with in terms of systemic racism. And so we share this reflection from the CDC, the world's largest public health agency, in terms of systemic racism. They define racism as a system consisting of structures, policies, practices, and norms that assigns value and determines opportunity based on the way people look or the color of their skin. This results in conditions that unfairly advantage some and disadvantage others throughout society. And they speak to the fact that racism, because it's so complex, has various effects across education, the justice system, the medical system, and so on and so forth. And so when we think about addressing it, we have to think very comprehensively in a systematic fashion in terms of what does change look like. To that end, we really want to focus on, again, how do we cultivate racial equity? And when we think about racial equity, we share this definition from Race Forward, a great organization doing the work by prioritizing measurable change in the lives of people of color. Racial equity is the process for moving towards the vision of racial justice. It seeks measurable milestones and outcomes that can be achieved on that road to racial justice. And so when we think about cultivating racial equity, we're not thinking about just outcomes, but processes on an individual and collective level. And how do we get really good at understanding what are the processes that are working to affect change in our environment? Realizing, again, that the processes exist in systems, again, whether it's an education system, the justice system, the medical system, but also on an individual level. What are people doing individually in terms of their behavior and practices, the processes that they've engaged towards that vision of racial justice? And so, just quickly sharing some information on the team. It's an expansive team, again, made up of students and staff and faculty that are working to really, again, build a robust database to ensure that our community has access to the resources to do the work effectively. You know, our goal is to put folks in Pittsburgh and beyond in a position where we don't have to guess anymore as to what are the effective practices to cultivate racial equity. We can actually share and learn from each other and utilize data-driven strategies to make impact. So I'm going to turn it over to our students to talk us through the database.
Hello. Today I will be talking about how the SDGs are the foundation of the database titled READ. The vision of the SDGs of creating a more just and equitable society by 2030 alongside their core mission, leaving nobody behind, along with our vision of spreading more awareness on racial equity. The SDGs also recognize the interconnectedness between social, economic, and environmental problems, which aligns with what we want to do and what we want to mirror, because we want to foster collaboration between these SDGs and create a database that is not just impactful but also sustainable. Using the SDGs as our framework also ensures that we are in line with organizations such as the UN and the civil society, and it also sets a clear standards on what the research should be about.
Okay, and beyond the SDGs, we also use the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute framework to construct our project around as well. This was founded within the University of Pittsburgh. And the idea of this framework is kind of based around cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's a systems thinking intervention designed to help individuals and communities reflect and cultivate cognitive behaviors towards racial equity. And it's interesting because there's 6 interconnected bilateral spheres of conscious development. So like you can see up here, the top of the sphere says recognizing racial oppression, and then the bottom says advancing racial liberation. So by looking into these spheres, we can kind of fill in the gaps between systemic racism that we're still working towards. And like I said, with the cognitive behavioral therapy method, this supports the virtuous feedback loops. And basically what we mean by this is that we think that whenever one person contributes in these behaviors and shows others that it's working effectively, that it'll almost construct a positive domino effect and encourage other people to do the same thing. And this framework was built around knowledge, disposition, skills, and awareness, and that is basically the idea that individuals and communities can constantly reflect and educate themselves in these different areas of racial equity.
Thank you. So, those two theories built the framework of how we collected data and how we integrated that data into our interface. But very quickly, given the fact that they're both fairly abstract, we want to give you a method in which you can visualize how those two theories are integrated into our database. So I'd like to introduce you to the Urban Kind Institute. The Urban Kind Institute was founded by Dr. Jamil Bey, President and CEO. The Urban Kind Institute is a Pittsburgh-based policy think tank that specifically addresses serving underserved communities and correcting racial inequalities. And within it, they have the Black Futures Initiative, which is a youth discourse-led initiative that specifically targets to answer the question, what does the future of Black America look like? So they tackle many different issues and publish them onto an online platform. What you're looking at right now is a screenshot from one of their most recent uploads addressing water inequality within Pittsburgh and race-based inequalities in water access. Now, when we think about how that aligns with what we're doing here in the database, in terms of SDG alignment, we could easily align the Black Futures Initiative with the quality education and the clean water and sanitation SDG, as well as the Reese sphere of embracing racial diversity. How we kind of would collect and get a resource like that is built from our research question methodology. Firstly, we wanted to emphasize accessibility and efficiency within our database. The end goal of this database is a completely open, global interface that is accessible to anyone. Because of this, we wanted to minimize obstructions that could be caused by language barriers and follow-through lethargy that comes through an extensive submission form. We used specifically a Qualtrics form because we feel like it countered both of those issues and maximized efficiency. Now, while most of the research inputs was done by our research team in the current process, the end goal with that would be an open source resource submission, so one could submit their own work into the database. The inclusion criteria, I'm actually going to take that away. The inclusion criteria is first, advancing racial equity in an innovative manner, and secondly, a solution-based resource. As we've seen from the forum and has been discussed by many eloquent speakers that we've heard from today, we understand what the problem is with racial inequality. Now, we wanted to make these resources be a center for solution-based projects, initiative, and classes. Now, within our resource submission methodology, we highlighted three main things that we're trying to achieve. Firstly, resource initiation. We did not want this to be an archival database that collected discontinued or fallen through projects for the sake of an academic central source. So we highlighted that in our submissions, we had a cap, a general priority cap of a 5-year relevancy in the submissions, and highlighted specifically resources that were still in progress or had just begun. Secondly, resource contact. Again, this is not simply an academic database. The goal of this is for it to be an engine of social change, and that means connecting the resource to the change maker. We want this to be an opportunity for those who are working in the Caribbean to connect with those working in London, to connect with those working in Southeast Asia, to connect working with those in Africa. We would hope to emulate some of the conversations and networking that we've seen at this forum into an open, accessible database. Thirdly, resource type. This is where we see the interplay between the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the Reese sphere, and how we are submitting data. So as you submit the data, you can identify, firstly, the identity group that this resource interacts with. Secondly, the most applicable Sustainable Development Goals. As you've seen from the Urban Kind Institute, it is open to select multiple different UN Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, the Reese sphere identity as well. The research question methodology and the theories that we built this research database with formulates and drives forward the way in which we see the interface and what we have presented. Which Gabby will discuss.
Okay, so diving into the interface itself, we really wanted to focus on human-centered design, acknowledging the complexity of the issues we're trying to address and the depth of the research that we have cultivated already. So with this, I'm sure many of you who've interacted with databases before know they're not the most interesting or easy to navigate at times, and this was something that we were actively trying to combat. So this is why when you see this, it may not look like a typical database, but we're trying to engage the audience from day one. So, going off of that, we've included a few attributes that would stray this away from other databases to encourage communication and collaboration and raise celebration around the work that's currently being contributed. So with this, the first attribute would be the equity lens. And the idea here would be that there would be a regional spotlight, a national spotlight, and an international spotlight, highlighting and celebrating the work of individuals, communities, and scholars that's currently being done. And the idea would be that it would encourage others to then contribute their data as well. With this, it also encourages connectivity with the people who are actively contributing these resources, putting faces to names, and recognizing that this would be a global database, so really having that image of who's working on this and what they're doing. Following along with that, so as you've seen in this picture, I apologize, the SDGs are the center of our database homepage. And what this is a navigation for communities and civil society to use to get to the resources they're trying to achieve. So with this, you may be looking for solutions in ensuring healthy lives and promoting well-being for all ages. With this, you would click on the goal of good health and well-being, and you would first be explained what the goal was, and then be navigated to a page just for those specific resources. And what this does is it minimizes the amount of language or navigation that you need to find the solutions for the problems you're trying to combat, really trying to make this accessible and digestible for mass communities. And this is just another example of another goal, SDG 10, achieving the same kind of idea. So another very prominent aspect of our database would be the forum. And with this, you would actually be able to contact resources from the database, but also worldwide. So the idea would be, you see a few examples here of like Racial Equity Forum, finding ways to create more accessible healthcare. You click on those, literally anyone can comment. And with this, we also do want to say that we recognize at this moment that not everyone has an access to a computer, and so we are currently in the stages of developing a mobile app, recognizing that most people are able to access mobile phones, and hoping that this would be a digestible and comprehensible way to achieve what we are trying to do.
So when we were developing this database, we also started working on a manuscript that would serve as a step-by-step basis of how we came up with this. This is important of our goal for longevity and scalability. Our hope is that other institutions could take our work and replicate it in their areas and regions in order to champion racial equity across the globe. It documents the course of data collection and model development, and we split it into 7 distinct sections, which we've been talking about in the presentation, such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute spheres, the data collection and methodology, the interface design and human-centered design, as well as intervention mapping framework. It provides a clear path for the replication of our work and scalability for the global utilization of the database, as well. And through our initiative, we hope to promote a collaboration, enhance awareness of racial equity resources.
To not only put in data and take out data, but it is also an opportunity to create relationships. It also puts agency in the hands of not just scholars and people in positions of power and authority, but people in the community. So civil society can initiate their work. They can reach out to scholars that they want, that they think they need to help them do the work that they need to do. And so READ can be a resource for people to build cases, so that if in their own communities and own spaces, if they need to go to policymakers, lawmakers, legislation, they can use READ as a way to build the knowledge and say, we might be in Brazil, but here's what's happening in Johannesburg, here's what's happening in South Central Los Angeles, here's what's happening in London. And that can help them build that base and build a case for themselves. And so we see it as a way for people to find best practices and solutions, as well as meeting across different stakeholders. So that policymakers need to connect with civil society, if academics need to connect with civil society or in the other direction, then READ can serve as an opportunity to do that. And so we see this as a very much as a beginning step, and we focus primarily on Pittsburgh, one for ease of the students, but also to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And so we are looking forward to having an opportunity to hear feedback about what this might look like in other contexts. Obviously, one of the main things that we would be thinking about is translation, and recognizing that to make this as easily and as accessible to people in different languages, but across different platforms and in different ways. And so we are open and eager to hear from others about ways in which they think we can add to this and build on it and partner with us. Thank you.
Mapping, ArchGIS mapping project. And specifically, we used the International Human Rights Framework of Reparations, the 5 categories that are also somewhat outlined with NARC's 10-point system, to look at what was happening in communities around the US. And what we uncovered through our initial 3 years was about 465 instances at the local level. These are community organizations, activists, Black-led efforts demanding repair locally. We just did another iteration last year looking at truth-telling processes and looking at actual reparations task force legislation, and discovered another 114 in the last 3 years. So as you can see, the first thing was mapping. Oh, and then there was blank. Oh, this is missing. Okay, unfortunately, this is a beautiful picture of a lot of community-led organizations, and I'm not sure what happened with the slides, so I'm just going to go straight. So the other thing we've done is work with at the local level. So out of those communities, we've worked at the local level to advance reparations by doing research with those community orgs. So we are Black-led, thank you, there it is, that's so beautiful. So these are Black-led organizations, these are the communities that are on that map. These are the faces of the individuals who are advancing repair in those communities. At the upper left is Africatown, Alabama. Down here in the lower right is Harris Neck, Georgia. In the middle is Brown Grove, Virginia, also on the side that says Save Brown Grove. And then up there in the corner, that is actually from First Repair with Robin Rue Simmons. We've been collaborating alongside Evanston since 2020 as well. Further, we have been doing additional advocacy. So one of them, again, is with First Repair. We have, led by Robin Rue Simmons, and you'll be hearing from her shortly. We have been holding national symposiums on state reparations for the last almost 18, has it been 18 months? Has it been a year?
It's been 2 years.
It's been 2 years. Oh, my land. Okay. The COVID makes you a little blurry, right? And we have regional meetings. So we are meeting regionally, West Coast, Midwest, South, East Coast, to listen to the reparations leaders in those communities to hear about their work and how perhaps we can help advance those efforts. We also have a toolkit that we developed for allies. What does it mean to be an ally? How do you stand in that space with communities to help advance reparations work? So that was another very important step. And now, additionally, we've been working on the SDGs. So interestingly enough, about 3 years ago, we first did one with Chicago using the social determinants of health. And then Professor Hansford and Attorney Irving came to us and said, how about using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? And so that's what we're now applying as well, as you've heard from the other universities.
So yes, we've been working with the Black Audit Project over the last couple of months, specifically in Detroit, Michigan, and Kansas City, Missouri. And the SDGs have been a framework for us to understand how these municipalities have progressed or not on the Sustainable Development Goals as it relates to the Black community. And so we specifically collaborated with the Detroit Reparations Task Force and the Mayor's Commission on Reparations in Kansas City. And through that, local Black communities have really, and their expertise and their autonomy have really been at the fore of the entire process. And I just want to quickly note, and we mentioned this in our toolkit, the importance of cultural humility in reparative justice work. And what this means is it's cultural humility is supposed to lead us to understanding the layered underpinnings of our identities, both as individuals and as a collective. And so it means walking alongside communities, engaging with communities with this ongoing openness and appreciation and deep desire to learn and to listen at all times. And so that has been at the core of all the work that we do. And so next slide, please. Including our methodology. And so this image right here shows that there are 3 critical dimensions to the work that we do. The first is a history of harms that dates back to the early 20th century, and it's intended to document these major harms in policy and even just with local community behaviors and attitudes. And then our second component is the impact analysis, and what this does is it connects the timeline with the present day issues and examines them using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And the third component is Black-led reparative policymaking, and so this is documenting work that is already happening on the ground to address trauma and ameliorate conditions caused by racist policy making. And all of these areas at the core is the Afro-descendant community, which approves and directs and informs all the work that we do. And so now to data sources. So these 6 themes were chosen specifically by the Kansas City Commission, Reparations Commission, to focus our research, and they were pulled from the SDGs, and they were chosen because of their deep relevance to local conditions. And so we then reviewed historical and contemporary data, both in qualitative and quantitative forms, through desk research, interviews with community leaders, and a city visit, which included both a tour of historical sites of importance to the Black community, but also listening sessions through public town halls that invited the whole community to come and share their lived experiences of harms, as well as their solutions for repair. And this combined participatory approach is necessary because, as we know, structural forces for generations have consistently trivialized and erased the Black experience in historical accounts and data collection processes. And so we want those Black stories and experiences to add, nuance to the literature and data that is often incomplete, absent, and not disaggregated. And to demonstrate the significance of merging data sources and the complementarity between them, I'm just going to quickly provide some examples on 3 of those research topics, the first of which is health. And so what we can see here on the right and in the bolded blue text, this is an archival resource provided by the Kansas City Public Library, and it's a 1926 report written by W.J. Tompkins, who was a Black doctor, and he wrote to health officials at the time to share this state of Black health. City public services have been glaringly absent in Black neighborhoods. And as we can see, these structural inequalities hold through other indicators, right? Like access to health insurance. Black residents have lower access to health insurance than white residents in Kansas City. And for education, the text on the left was through an interview with Dr. Kevin Boulard and Dr. Linwood Tahid. And the bold text serves to highlight the deliberate subordination of Black excellence in education to political expediency, and how this discrimination and marginalization within the school system affected achievement in education later on in life for the Black community. So as we see, only 31% of Blacks in Kansas City aged between 25 and 34 have a college degree. And then the last theme I'm going to touch on is criminal justice. And so collectively, putting all of these data sources together, we see a culture of systemic racism, within the Kansas City Police Department that not only creates a hostile work environment, right, through derogatory comments and racial slurs, but also feeds into cycles of impunity and protracted underrepresentation of the Black community in institutions of power, and that includes council representation. As we can see in both the Kansas City Police Department and the City Council of Kansas City, it has historically and continues to be predominantly white. So I'm going to pass it on over to Pablo to talk about reparative policymaking.
Hi everyone. My name is Pablo. I'm currently a 2L at Howard University School of Law, and I'm contributing the legislative and policy making piece to this project, and it's a really important piece in the overall reparations movement. So let's go to the next slide. So I want to start first by mapping out the legislative landscape. And so in order to accomplish any goal within a political system, it's important to understand how that political system functions. What are the structures that exist within that political system? How is change made in that political system? How are laws passed, etc. So just zooming in on Kansas City in particular, there's the federal level, the state level, and then the municipal level. So at the state level, the Missouri General Assembly is the main legislative body in Missouri. It is a bicameral legislature, which means there's two chambers, an upper chamber and a lower chamber. The Senate is the upper chamber with 34 members, the lower chamber, the House of Representatives with 163 members. Moving down to the more local municipal level is the Kansas City City Council. It's unicameral, meaning there's just one body. There are 13 members, and that includes the mayor. And Kansas City in particular is a council manager system, meaning there is a main city council, which is the legislative body. There's a mayor, which is the executive. And then there's a more administrative position, which is the manager, the city manager. And they're responsible for almost essentially like running the city. And so continuing to map out Kansas City in particular, what's unique about Kansas is that it has home rule. And so home rule is essentially, it's a concept that highlights the relationship between state governments and local governments. And so cities and municipalities that have home rule powers tend to have more power, so to speak, than cities that do not. So what that means is a city that has home rule power doesn't always have to go and get authorization from the state government to pass laws on certain issues. What that also means is that when they do pass laws on local issues, those laws are oftentimes protected from the state displacing those laws. Why is that important? Why is that relevant? That means that the municipal government of Kansas City has more power to enact certain laws that other cities within the state of Missouri do not. In addition to home rule, there are 3 additional powers that the people in Kansas City have access to based on their charter. A charter is essentially the constitution but for a city. Those 3 powers are the initiative process, the referendum process, and the recall process. An initiative essentially allows any citizen to propose a law that everyone can then vote on. And if they vote on it, it then becomes law. And the way that works is whoever wants to get a law passed, you create a petition, you write down what the law that you want to get a vote on, you write it at the top of the petition, and if you reach the threshold in terms of the amounts of signatures you get, that law then gets put to a vote. If the people of that city want it, is now a law.
Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Walker. I am a special assistant and on the board at First Repair. So today I will be talking a little bit about the comprehensive approach that First Repair takes when dealing with reparations. So first, I'd like to start off with the definition that we use when approaching reparations. So the process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people who were injured due to their group identity and violation of their fundamental human rights by a government, corporation, institution, or individual. This would include things like slavery, black codes, racist housing laws, and Jim Crow laws. So when we approach reparations, we see it as having 5 forms of reparations. And we get these forms from the United Nations. These include satisfaction, compensation, guarantees of non-repetition, such as institutional reform and strengthening judicial independence, rehabilitation, and this can include medical and psychological care, as well as social services and legal services. And then lastly, restitution, measures that restore survivors to their original situation prior to the suffering violations of international human rights law. So when dealing with reparations in Evanston, we wanted it to be a collaborative effort with our Black residents who were deserving of reparations and who would ultimately be receiving those reparations. So when we asked what different forms of repair would you like to see in your community, it wasn't just we would like a check. It was rent control, policy reform, monuments, business grants, historic landmarks, things like that. So there's multiple different ways of repair, and our citizens recognize that. It's not just a check. A check is not going to be the only thing that's going to repair all the harm that has been done to our citizens in our community. So this behind me is a timeline of Evanston's reparations. This work actually began in 2002 and then was reintroduced in 2018. And 2018, it really picked up, and we were able ultimately in April of 2022 to actually start dispersing reparations to our Black residents. So this was definitely a collaborative effort. It was not just Evanston, the city of Evanston saying, we're gonna start helping out our Black residents. So there's a lot of different factors that went into this in order to actually see our residents receive reparations. And this included stakeholders, as in the Black community, or our reparations stakeholder authority of Evanston, legal assistance, government, national reparations organizations such as NARC and NCOBRA, and as well as First Repair, local historians such as Storefront Legacy Center in Evanston. Local historians were very important in actually identifying the harm that was done in Evanston, Illinois, so that we could make a case for reparations to our city. Also financial institutions, as well as allies. Our interfaith community has had a really big impact on our reparations process in Evanston. Funding sources, we use our cannabis sales tax as well as home rule taxes. Researchers at colleges and universities, philanthropy groups, and local reparations organizations. And I will now pass it on to Robin to talk a little bit more.
As Elisa mentioned, whose family has received reparations, is that right? Yep, multiple members of your family? That's right. That's right. We have went through a pretty extensive community engagement process. We all know here, I'm preaching to the choir, one of the most important practices of repair is that the harmed community is informing and prescribing redress. And so it was our Black community that prescribed our forms of repair. And so we have cannabis sales tax as funding. We also have our graduated real estate transfer taxes. So homes that are sold above $1 million, in some cities they call it a wealth tax. We call it a graduated real estate transfer tax. That funds reparations. Initially it was $10 million. We have since added an additional $10 million, so we have $20 million, and I'm looking for 100 more, and our committee is committed to doing the same. There's so much to say in so little time. One other thing I want to do is lift up our interfaith community, who has been really key in organizing and public community education around reparations, building ally support, which includes 70% now of our white community, after practicing reparations, supports reparations as public policy, and all communities in Evanston have increased faith and trust in our local government because of the practice of repair. So that interfaith community, about a dozen churches and synagogues initially in a very short amount of time, from Juneteenth to Dr. King's birthday, raised $1 million to be a commitment, a tangible commitment to what was happening at a municipal level. We have other institutions that have begun the process of repair inspired by what we've done at a municipal level. And so in calling that question, it wasn't that I believed we could, as a city, address full repair or even comprehensive reparations alone. Our North Star is a Federal Commission for Reparations, HR 40. But we knew that we could take a first step and be an inspiration to others. And so we've seen the support grow. We're very proud to see that our commitment in Evanston has inspired a national movement for reparations or local reparations initiatives in the way that we're seeing it today. In 2019, it was Evanston, and today there are over 100 initiatives, and we've worked with more than 100 initiatives. 76 of them attended our symposium that was just this last December in Evanston, Illinois. It's a national symposium. And so I'd like to close before I pass it over to my colleague, attorney Nick Cummings, with an invitation. We meet monthly. We have a national strategy session, as Professor Linda Mann mentioned. It is on Zoom. It is 12:30 p.m. Central Time. It is an hour of power. We also have regional breakout sessions, and you're all invited to that. We also have a national strategy session. This year it is December 5th through the 7th in Evanston. We have some opportunities for scholarship for those that need travel assistance and accommodations. We sponsored 66 of the 226 that attended last year. And we're also hosting our first regional retreat in Tulsa, Oklahoma during the Juneteenth season. So the 13th of June through the 15th, please do join us in Tulsa. All of this information is found at firstrepair.org. All of our programs, our toolkits. If you'd like to see more about the process and implementation, eligibility and application process, and all the complexities of reparations, please do watch the documentary. It's called The Big Payback. You can see it on Amazon Prime or on PBS. It's also on Apple TV. And I will pass it over actually to Attorney Nick Cummings.
Good evening. As Robin mentioned, my name is Nicholas Cummings. I'm the founder of Osiris Professional Services and the former Corporation Counsel for the City of Evanston. And having worked alongside Robin, the question wasn't how, the question really was how are we going to actually fix this, not so much are we going to worry about what's going on. And so with that in mind, we looked at a couple of what I almost always exclusively call hurdles. I'm now looking at as opportunities because we've actually cleared some of these hurdles already. So they're now opportunities for us to advance the cause of reparations. The first, at least in the United States, is constitutional. The 14th Amendment limits what state and local governments can really do. At first, it was passed to try and protect the recently emancipated from state action. Now it's being used to stop states from repairing or restoring that harm. The second is judicial. Since Reconstruction, we have a lot of laws that passed, including civil rights laws in the 60s, that mainly left the concept of restoration and repair to the courts. Well, that's an insufficient remedy. As we're here at the United Nations, there's 5 different types, as was mentioned earlier in the slides. So cash compensation, which is like an exclusive Western remedy in court, doesn't really usually solve the problem. There's also other issues when trying to go to court. You might have a lack of standing. The statute of limitations may have passed. There was actually a case brought in Northern District of Illinois in the 90s by a former Evanston alderperson, Lionel Jean-Baptiste, who's now a judge in Circuit Court of Cook County. That case was dismissed. Judge Norwell wrote a 15-page opinion and outlined exactly what we needed to do legislatively in order to solve the problem. So that was one of the sources that we looked at in trying to develop the program in Evanston. Legislative is on here, even though I am a strong proponent of a legislative remedy. You have states that some of us in this room have been dealing with, or at least watching closely, trying to ban the study and spending on reparations initiatives. We already have the state of Florida that doesn't allow you to teach black history the way that it probably should be taught. So with that in mind, the legislative solution, I feel like this microphone keeps going in and out.
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. The legislative solution is probably the most comprehensive way that we're going to perceive repair and restoration, but we have to understand that there are agents that are working against what it is that we're trying to do. And I put education as an important opportunity here because, as I heard earlier this morning, you have some people that push against the idea of reparations because we're not responsible for the acts of our forebears. This is always the argument. Well, I didn't own any slaves. Well, I didn't discriminate against anybody. But we're dealing with institutions. One thing that I hear a lot of law students in the room, I'm a practicing lawyer, institutions last, right? Particularly government institutions. So it doesn't matter who's elected, doesn't matter who's in office, it's the state of Missouri. Doesn't matter who the governor was or who the legislative bodies are, it's the state of Missouri. 2000 and 2005, you had institutions like Oklahoma, Mississippi, Virginia, and JP Morgan Chase make commitments. Between 2010 and 2019, North Carolina, Virginia, the city of Chicago, Georgetown University, and the United States government made reparative harm, mainly in the form of compensation. Some of those were settled lawsuits. In 2019, you have the Catholic Nuns of the Society of the Sacred Heart, Virginia Theological Seminary, Princeton Theological Seminary, the University of Georgetown, Episcopal Diocese of New York, and then, of course, Evansville, Illinois. So as you see, there's a theme. We're not looking at individuals to repair harm. We're looking at institutions, and those are sort of everlasting and continue on. So that's why I advocate or why we push for a legislative repair, and that's what Evanston did, is a legislative repair in order to try and resolve some of the issues of discrimination in the city. As I close, I'm going to pass it to the renowned Professor Hansford, my brother from another mother, and to discuss how we can continue to do this at the international level as well. But thank you guys for your time and for the opportunity to address you today.
Work that she's been able to do in Evanston, which was captured in the movie The Big Payback, with also the renowned Congresswoman who's also a member of that cast, Sheila Jackson Lee. And they talk about their historic march to becoming a city that actually is already in the process and already has given reparations. And so that is a process that she's now organizing hundreds of cities around the country to replicate. So we're talking about real change makers happening, working to make change happen right in front of our eyes. So for me, one of my takeaways from this is when we had a chance to go to Detroit and Kansas City, not only did we receive data from people in those communities, but we received knowledge. Knowledge is being produced on the ground. So many of the categories that the Sustainable Development Goals have outlined for the 2030 plan articulated by the UN are pitiful. These categories are simplistic. They don't capture the true essence of what is happening in our communities. For example, there's an SDG on housing, which talks about access to quality housing, but that framework does not capture what happened in Detroit, where there was a program that they called urban renewal, as James Baldwin called Negro removal, where in the city of Detroit, in particular, a community called the Black Bottom was victimized as the city council leaders decided that they were going to target the black community for urban redevelopment, and they built I-75, the big highway, exactly in the middle of the black community on purpose. And we have them on record saying that right now Detroit looks like Mississippi, and we're going to change the complexion of the city of Detroit. So they took communities, social capital, churches, families, homes, and destroyed them over the course of 3 or 4 years, moved people out of their communities simply on the grounds of race, right? So that story is a story which is much more important for us to understand than just the SDG of housing. And there's not adequate housing. The question is why? And almost always the answer to that question is structural racism. So I just want to commend all of the work that's taking place here. It's very difficult to conceptualize taking these global United Nations things that happen on these world stages and translating them into action on the ground for people in their neighborhood. And that's what I see happening here in Miami, in Pittsburgh, in Evanston. And so I'm just really excited to see what questions people have and how this relates to your work and how these tools might be things that you can use as you are organizing. So thank you guys. I see the hand was up here. Yeah.
Our dynamic in the Caribbean is that we had a lot of absentee planters. So the money went out to England, to France, to the Dutch, the Danish, the Spanish, French. Okay, so this is why we target those countries and those governments, these companies there. Some of them, as you've heard, if you've paid attention to the Caribbean, you've seen some people like Laura Trevelyan came last year. Her family found out that they had owned 1,006 enslaved people on Grenada. We've seen, and so she started a fund for reparations in Grenada. We saw the Gladstone family. We've heard of the Church of England. They've just raised the fund that they'd like to put forward. The company I'm talking to, we haven't decided, but I learned a lot here from you all today. But we do have descendants, we do have families in the Caribbean whose also their genesis, they trickle down. The thing is that over time, of course, the complexion have changed. You have some of them may still be Caucasian, very hardly, but even doing my own research, although I grew up poor, in doing my own research, I found out that in my lineage, there was a planter whose, I had my surname before I got married, came down from his lineage. So we have descendants of people who are connected. So the thing is, and then we have companies who also came down, but our islands are small, so how do we, at the end of the day, target, like you're able to go to different companies within Evanston and those places you talked about. I find it a very ticklish thing to do, because as I research our history and I'm able to identify some of the families who still exist in our societies. Our society is so small that it's like, when I go on the radio, for instance, I go on a radio show and I start to call names, and people are like, oh, this person, so it ends up being very ticklish as to how to go about a local, as you mentioned, a local reparations drive. But this inspired me to move forward. So it's like we need some help. I like what you're doing, but I could see that I could gain some help from what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to say I relate to that so much because my own...
From that, but that point that you're making us to put those who left, those who went to Caribbean people would have gone to England, Canada, America, and wherever else in the world. How would they benefit from that plan? Is something that would need to be addressed.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And the decision to include indigenous people.
Yes, indigenous people is definitely part of the plan, and I think another aspect of the plan that has been, well, we have been tussling with it, is the indentured laborers. Indentured laborers who indentureship happened, as you know, including in America, before, during, and after enslavement. So the difference being that enslavers, the indentured laborers, were paid, but many of them did not survive, and some of their descendants are still in the Caribbean today, especially those who came post-abolition, like the Indian, Chinese, and so on. The problem being for many in the Caribbean is, why should indentureship be included in the quest for reparatory justice, when many of them lived much better lives post emancipation than enslaved. As a matter of fact, they were brought in to diminish the work of the Africans. So it's quite an interesting situation, but as Dr. Beckles said, it's all part of the wealth creation. So basically, we are not going to say we all had to contribute to this wealth. We all suffered injustices to create the wealth for these European countries. So therefore, we can't like separate, okay?
I definitely agree. Would like to extend the importance of the Global Diaspora Network in terms of we all share the same struggle, but we also have very specific and nuanced dynamics in each of the countries, in each of the diasporas, from the Caribbean to the United States to Africa, and even within Africa, even within one country like Sudan, for instance, or Mauritania. So I think that there is definitely should be emphasis on expanding the Global Diaspora Network and sharing methods together, but also finding the nuances and figuring out what works where. The second thing is, currently, after focusing on Global South and decolonial theory and Afro-diasporic integration into EU and migration, a whole mixture of subjects, now as I'm studying with Europeans in a very European space and institutions, specifically in Italy also, when we talk about reparations, I'm probably one of the few people in the class that ever brings something like this up, it's always seen, even by my German and different European professors, as this totally unfathomable thing. So I really appreciate the conference for showing me more of what reparations would look like and what it would look like on a global scale for different communities as well. So I think that's really important, but of course, for people coming from Africa and the Caribbean who are making the pitches to the European countries, there's a huge disconnect. Because when I go to the European spaces institutions, they're not even, I feel like the majority are not even considering this at all. I think they see reparations as a full joke, firstly, which is unfortunate, and secondly, they think it's just the cutting the check, the money. So I think that there should be a lot more, there needs to be a way to communicate better, which is really difficult, but some open line of communication in which we can really pitch it and define it to them in terms of actually getting it from African and Caribbean. And then, of course, we have the example set in the US between our institutions and then our local communities. So that's the other thing. This also makes me think of Afro-diaspora children in the sense of, for instance, I'm Sudanese American. I've seen a bit of discourse in tension between like, okay, well, we're all black in the US, but some of us also have different histories, right? So if my parents came from Sudan, I have a different exact experience in history than my African American peers and classmates, brothers and sisters. So the differences in entitlement to different reparations also differ based on that. So my question to the panel would be, how would you kind of differentiate the process between that? Because I mean, I feel the colonial trauma when I come to Europe and, you know, our country's destroyed and ongoing wars and exploitations and lack of development and all this stuff, but I wouldn't be in the exact same situation as my African American peers. But, you know, my parents and the people of Sudan and the people of South Africa and so on and so forth should also get their direct colonial reparations. So how do you distinguish that? Because we're in an age of globalization and people have moved and are on the move. There are so many internally displaced people on the move, migrants, so on and so forth. So that's another thing that I feel like should also be considered, also considering that we have the nuances in our different experiences, which are all very important, but we want to make sure that everyone really gets the reparations they deserve. But these are some of my thoughts.
Right, thank you. Thank you. Interesting questions. I know you and
we're also concerned about the Quakers and others that ought to be part of it, the Catholic Church that has a huge responsibility, where some have met with the Pope and talked, but we don't know exactly what, because one of the things that's concerned is there's so much going on, there's little pockets here and there, and we're not really all talking to each other. And it could be sometimes because what our issues are in the UK as the belly of the beast, where there were not so many enslaved people in the country, and so how they dealt with enslavement and what they think about it is very different. So we've got like the Windrush situation where people were kept in the Caribbean, they had the right to come to the UK to settle, and then they changed the laws so they didn't have. So there's a whole series of problems around citizenship there, which links back to enslavement, but it's not as obvious as if people were in the UK. We have real concerns about Laura Trevelyan's involved in the heirs of slavery. Well, for one, we do not use the term slavery. And they seem to be very good at getting themselves in the public eye, but actually, what about the Africans? What about the descendants? Why are they being listened to and not us who were wronged? So we're supposed to be in another meeting that we've sponsored, but we've come here because it's specifically about reparations. So I really want to kind of touch base, let people know we're here. We're here until Sunday. If we could maybe exchange contact details and look at what are you doing. Your laws are different to our laws, so there's some things that you're doing that we're never going to be able to do, but there's some things maybe that we're doing that others might be able to match. But a lot for us, it's connecting. We're going to have a reparations conference in Tanzania, 2nd to the 6th of October, where we will be inviting any African who's involved in reparations to come and talk about what they're doing, share experiences. We have a Sunday International Solidarity anti-Zoom every Sunday, 4 p.m. UK time, where people can just drop in whenever they're available, and we can have speakers about whatever it is. So you could come and talk to us about what you're doing in your areas and let other people know that way. But it's been really good to talk about the advocacy network and the other things that are going on here. But it really feels like we have to find some means of all connecting so that we know who's doing what and how we can maybe bounce off each other or just give each other support and say, yeah, it's really bad that that happened and you haven't been able to get what you wanted out of it, but we're supporting you, carry on.
I can see the convenience of using the SDGs, but I also see the disempowerment of the Black community in that you did not, either use the matrix that created by the Urban League, the State of Black America, or to actually do the grassroots work of having the various communities to identify and articulate their own priorities. And a part of reparations is, of course, empowerment. Secondly, my second question really goes to the sister from CARICOM, and that is that I hear CARICOM talking about the liability of the church, the crown, and the various European, but I don't hear any discussion about representing the interests of CARICOM people, Caribbean people who left the Caribbean and came to the nuisance that is known as the United States and Canada even, and holding the colonizers liable for their leaving, as opposed to their holding the United States and Canada liable for actually giving them aid and comfort, because coming to the United States and to Canada was an improvement over the situation in the Caribbean. So how do you all propose to deal with that?
We want no part of any organization that is going to espouse any claim and bringing it together our indigenous brothers and sisters used dogs to hunt us down while we were slaves to bring us back to the plantations. The indentured laborers, they got lands. And even in Guyana, what we suffer today as a result, as you rightfully mentioned, they coming after emancipation. But let me go back to the issues how we could network or we could share ideas and so forth between North America and the Caribbean. The thing is, our governments want to bring a claim on our behalf. As individuals or organizations, we don't have the necessary competence to approach the International Court of Justice. So you will need an organization. I think by meeting and discussing, we can see if it is possible. If a claim is being brought against the European country,
so
is it possible?
my concern is most Black people don't know about Afro-descendant, that we are Afro-descendants recognized globally. So is there anything being done to, create awareness for people in the United States? And I guess that's because you're working with them too, so that would be a question for both of you.
Right. Okay. The answer is no, essentially. There's not enough being done to create awareness in the United States about any of this. Besides those of you who are here who are able to come and spread the word. We are hoping that as the Permanent Forum grows, we'll have more opportunities to interact with the communities, and these processes like the visits to Detroit and to Kansas City are mechanisms for that. We had about maybe 100 people, 75 to 100 people come to our meeting, our town hall meeting in Detroit, told us off, for the rightful flaws they observed in our process. So we got good feedback from the community in Detroit. That process being replicated in different cities, we'll start to get the word out about what's happening, we hope. But that's a big hurdle, is to get the communications portion of this work to a stage where people in our communities really know what's happening and are able to tap in. Good questions there. I know you had your hand up. So.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm an elected official, so I promise I will be brief. My name is Anika Bowie, and I'm a St. Paul City Council member in the capital of Minnesota. How I heard about the Permanent Forum for people of African descent was because I was a 2020 fellow. And during that time, I also served as the vice president for the Minneapolis NAACP. Part of my goal with learning about international law and some of the SDGs was to address police brutality and also police accountability. I mentioned that I'm a newly elected city council member, over 100 days in my role. And I actually transitioned into this role with a reparations commission already established. Now we're in a position to actually steer that reparations commission, ensuring that it's successful. I'm also born and raised from Rondo. For people who do not know, Rondo is have very similar history to Kansas City and Detroit, Chicago and New York, where we had a striving Black business corridor of over hundreds of businesses and homes, and thousands of people were displaced because of the implementation of I-94. In 2024, we are currently right now in a process of what we're calling, or the Minnesota Department of Transportation is calling, rethinking I-94. We are, as part of the Biden's Build Back Better infrastructure plan. So we are readdressing a lot of the traumas and the harms and the loss. So that gets me to my next question, right, around how can First Repair, other organizations be at the table to assist with organizations and cities ordinance, such like the Reparations Commission, and even to your point, right, of the community is always going to tell you off when you're not, in line with what they want. I'm from Rondo also. I served, like I said, in Minneapolis, so I really want to be able to take this experience and bring it back home, and so we can really implement some strong change and also have a case study analysis. You know, I come from the activist circle that believes in, you know, if you are silenced in your oppression, or you're silenced in your oppression, they'll kill you and says you deserved it. So I just want to ensure that we have that support, not only in St. Paul, but also in Minnesota.
Right? It's not all about money. We want land too. And you know, we need hospitalization, we need a whole bunch of things. But if you want to get a copy of this, reach out to me and I can get you a copy of this. This format here is good for the whole nation. We don't need a whole study for everybody to keep doing this study. Just study. You just need to go there and get the work done, and so you can cut the check like the sister, like the elder said up in there earlier today.
Do you have a link that you could share, possibly, like a Google link?
First Repair was actually just in Kingston for Heritage Week and National Heroes Day for programming with Dr. Vereen Shepard and at the University of the West Indies. And I think that there's a lot we can learn from each other. And I hope that Professor Hansford, there is some mobilization around some international committee or commission so that we can collaborate more so than we've been able to.